Okay, I'll call to order a special council meeting for the Township of Brunel, Lindnock and Raglan from November the 3rd, 2021, approximately 4:17 p.m. After a few technical difficulties, we finally got going. Councillor Budrich. Okay, Councillor Kaufeld.
Here.
Councillor Licky.
Here.
Councillor Rutledge. Here. Okay, and so councils all present other than Councillor Budrich. We'll wait to see if something changes.
She's on the meeting.
She's on the meeting. Okay. Is there any way you can give her a call?
She's on the phone.
Here.
Oh, you're here, Andrew?
She's here. I see her face.
Is she on the phone?
Unmute yourself, Andrea. Lower left. Oh,
6:32.
Are you there, Andrea?
Stopping. Yeah.
Okay, so,
1 second, she's gonna call back.
okay. We'll give it one more. Okay. Disclosure of interest on anyone's part with the matters before us today.
No.
Seeing none, the first order on the agenda is council training. I won't go through the individual things. Because we're running late and then let Katie get right at it, so.
Excellent. Thank you, Your Worship and members of council. I'm wondering if you might want to shut off a light so that the slides will be a little bit easier for you to read. And before I get into the presentation today, I want to let you know that online, and I know you can't see Tammy, but we also have a Tammy at E-Brand. And Tammy is going to be participating here today, as well as Paul Cassandra. He can actually join us. He will be participating in this presentation as well.
Hello, I think I made it back in by phone. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay.
I'm not sure what was going on with Zoom.
Okay.
I tried.
Okay, so I'll continue then. So I just want to let council know that our participation here today and with Tammy and Paul, this is all being covered by E-Brand. There is no cost to the municipality for this training today, and for any of the things that we are going to be talking about throughout our presentation. So with that, I'm going to kind of give you an overview. I'll go through this part pretty quickly because I'm going to be aware of time. And really what I want to talk a lot about today is the role of council, the role of staff, the role of officers and employees, the role of a CAO. You have to have that model. And then governance versus management. This is something that is incredibly important for municipal councils to understand. And especially in light of some of the recent changes or recent recommendations that and his name will come up in the slides. I can't tell you it off the top of my head, but there was a report for Collingwood and the public inquiry that was done there. And they're making recommendations to changes to the municipal act to provide more clarity for council so that they actually can better understand their role. So the role of council, as you all are aware, council to be on municipal council, you must be elected. You must be a Canadian citizen over the age of 18 and all of those things. And the key parts of the council role, there really are three fairly large parts to your role, and that's a representative role, a policy-making role, and a stewardship role. Section 224 of the Municipal Act is the piece of legislation that tells you what your role is. And you'll notice in there that it doesn't say anywhere that your job is to drive the grader. When I talk to councils often, I hear stories about members of council directing staff, members of council trying to do work in the municipality. I had recently done some training where the member of council was cleaning the outhouses because she didn't believe the staff was doing it well enough or quickly enough. And those are not your role. Your role is to set policy. Your role is to represent people, develop a vision for your community, look at where you want to go and strategically think about how you're going to get there. When we talk about your representative role, this I've taken right from the Ontario government website, the NMAH site. And they talk about the fact that councillors are elected by their constituents to represent their views when dealing with issues that come before council. And this means that at the council table, you represent the people and not your private interest. The key challenge is that the constituents may have many views and opinions and that councillors cannot represent them all at all times. And that's one of the challenges I think councils we see often. I work with a number of communities where they have a very vocal group of citizens that come to their meetings and make council decision-making very difficult because council will decide on something today because of the pressure they're getting from the people in the gallery. And then tomorrow they're not happy with that decision and they're meeting again to rescind the decision because it wasn't what was in the best interest of the community. And in essence, in some of these communities, the ratepayers are actually bullying council. And a lot of it is because of lack of training in terms of what council's responsibilities are and what their rights are. Because as a member of council, you have the right to not be bullied. And you have a right to have your meetings with decorum, and you can choose to evict people from your meeting. You have to warn them and there are things you have to do, but it can be done. So you also have a policy-making role, and this is really what we call lawmaking. So when council passes a resolution at a meeting or a bylaw, you are making law. You are not managers of the administration, you are policymakers. You set these, I like to say these are the rules. These are the rules that staff have to work by, or your volunteers or your communities. These are the rules people have to work by within the municipal sector. And again, this is coming from the province's website, and many council decisions are outline or routine, I should say, dealing with the ongoing administration of the municipality. And I want to really draw your attention to the word administration. That doesn't mean that you are administrators of the municipality. That just means it's about the functioning of the municipality. And policymaking involves a number of steps. I'm not going to go through these because of time, but you will have copies of this presentation for your to read after.
No, so sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but we're getting a copy of them,
Yes.
so I really won't have to do that.
No, you're going to be getting copies,
Okay.
and I've actually asked Val if she would place it on the website after the meeting is over, so that the public who are participating today might also look at it if they wish.
Okay.
So your stewardship role, this is one of the roles I think that council has the most difficulty with in any of the ones municipalities that I've been working with. And what we see often, and I use an analogy, you go to a council meeting and you've got a big landfill matter and it's going to cost you millions of dollars to solve the problem, and council thinks no problem, get it done, solve, write the check for $1 million. But then when it comes to the budgeting process, you start arguing about what I say are paper clips. So you start getting into the minutia, which is really not council's role. Council's role is to decide about the levy and whether or not there's going to be an increase in the levy. And that's really how you budget. You don't sit down and go through line by line everything that's in your chart of accounts and ensure that the amount is just going up a little. That's the staff's job. Your job is to give the treasurer direction as to whether or not you have an appetite for an increase in the levy, whether or not you're willing to change any level of service. And then the treasurer is the one who brings back a budget for your consideration. So part of the stewardship role going forward, you're going to be talking a lot about it if you haven't already, is asset management. It's one of the things that governments generally are challenged with when you have such a big amount of infrastructure and not enough cash to be able to keep it going. And before, we never planned. You know, when you have a house and you know you gotta have a roof replaced in 5 years, you put money away each year till you have enough to pay for your roof, or you borrow the money to fix your roof. But in the municipal sector, councils are really shy about borrowing money, especially in the small communities. And the challenge you have is your reserve funds aren't significant enough to be able to replace your infrastructure. So it's really important that when council is looking at their stewardship role, that you are preparing for the future and that you aren't leaving a legacy of extreme deplete, that's the word I'm looking for, of your reserves, and that you're actually trying to invest in good management of your assets. So why this matters? One of the things that is really important for council to understand is you are a government. You're not a board of management. You are not a group of people sitting around making decisions that don't affect people, that you are a government, and every decision you make affects the corporation. And it's important for you to remember that when you even are looking at something that you might think is minor, you're still setting rules and policy, and it's important for you to take that seriously. One of the things we often find in small communities is that there's lack of formality, because everybody knows everybody, everybody's grown up together, and you sit around the council table, and in some communities, council sits and meets and comes up with all kinds of ideas, but there's no decisions made. And so the staff come to the next meeting and council's upset because something didn't get done, but there was no decision making. And that's why you need to have a formal process so that you do pass resolutions, which you guys do. And to make sure that everything is above board. And accountable and transparency is another one we'll get to shortly. You are also required as a council to appoint a number of statutory officers. Your chief building official, if you have a fire department, you have to have a fire chief. You must have a fire prevention officer. You need to have a chief building official, fire enforcement, clerk, treasurer. There are a number of them that you have to have. And municipalities are the most accountable and transparent level of government. And I equate it to the fishbowl, because you can't do anything without public scrutiny. You have the open door, your meetings are open to the public, you produce your minutes, you have to have audits. All your decisions are open for the public view with the exception of the ones that you're allowed to have in closed session, as you know. And it's really important. One of the things I've been reading a lot about lately is about ethics. And I was reading about business ethics, and the fellow who was writing says there are no business ethics, there are just ethics. And it's all about value and what you value as a community. And I think one of the things we have been encouraging councils to do, if you don't have one, is to develop a mission and vision statement so that you can start to share what your values are, so that your team knows, your staff knows what the values are. So the council is the body that governs the municipality. And that doesn't mean an individual member of council has any authority. The only authority you have is in this room as a body. You make decisions as a body. That includes the mayor. Councils have to, when they're out there, remember that they don't get to direct the actions of staff. They ought not to promise things to constituents that they believe they may be able to make happen, but can't, or but it's not your job to be promising things to people that council may not be supportive of. And especially when you're the mayor. We often see that the mayor gets a little overly involved in the role and almost is like the CAO, and the act says that the mayor is the CEO, and it doesn't mean like a private company CEO. It means that the mayor is the head of council. He's the CEO of the council itself. A CAO would be the one responsible for all of the people who work in the environment. It's really important that council operates within their role. And this is why. Section 448 of the Municipal Act is the most important piece that you need to know. The other stuff is your role, but this here protects you. So if you're doing your job as a counselor within your role and in good faith, people can't even start a lawsuit against you. And it's the same for municipal employees. As long as you're not doing something that's contrary to your role or contrary to law, you would be protected. And I know when Paul is presenting with me, he often tells stories about members of council who have done things that were outside their role and they have been sued personally and were on the hook for it. And other times they were working within their role. And he says, council doesn't have to be right. You don't have to be right. You just have to be operating in good faith and within your role. And that's why it's really important that members of council don't tell staff, give staff direction, that they don't drive the grader, that they don't get in the backhoe and go for a ride, that they really try to follow their code of conduct and the role that they have been legislated to carry out. So one of the things I really like to talk to the councils about is the fact that I often hear, oh, well, you know, what do we do? You know, if we don't manage the staff, what do we do? Well, you have a more important role. Your role is to set the level of service that the municipality is going to receive. That's from everything from road or snow plowing, road maintenance, your landfill, if you have landfills, water, sewer, whatever service you believe your municipality wants or needs, that is what you do. And then you have to look at that level of service and establish the policies that are required to ensure that level of service is achieved. And one of the things that I can explain to you about minimum maintenance standards for roads is up until a certain point in time, councils didn't have any, you had to manage your roads, but there was no policy around it. No one would adopt a policy either because you didn't necessarily want to be tied to the policy. So when the province had made it mandatory, the changes to the Municipal Act that you now have to follow minimum maintenance standards, that's really important and critical that you don't go beyond that because you put yourself at risk. And so when you're looking at levels of service, it's really important that you get professional advice from your staff, that you understand what it is you're providing and ensure that the policy is the right policy. A lot of times I've been recently working with communities where the policies are out of date. The bylaws are no longer legal or they were never followed in the first place, which is even worse. Maybe I already talked about the idea that you have to make decisions at the council table as a whole body and not individually. The other part about that's important is it has to be at the table. So if you have a quorum of council who sits outside at the picnic shelter one day and decides that, you know, hey, we really need a bus for our municipality to take residents places, so we're going to do that. That's what they consider an illegal council meeting. And it's no different if one of you picks up the phone and calls another one and then call somebody else and call somebody else with the same message and trying to influence and make a decision, move business forward at the municipality. The ombudsman has said that that is a serial council meeting. And why that's important for you to know is it's also part of your code of conduct. You need to be following the rules of your procedure bylaw and within your rule and all of those things. Council's role is also to hire a CAO if you choose to have that model. We've been working with a lot of communities lately where they have chosen to not have a CAO model, but have gone with a municipal administrator or a municipal manager, town manager. It's really important that council is not the body that's running the show. And I've gone to councils and I have said to them, because they were very much into the micromanaging of the staff, sending emails all the time, individual councillors trying to tell staff what to do, direct staff, spend a lot of time saying that they want this done, that done, and done now. Especially when it comes to road maintenance, they want this pothole fixed, and they want that pothole fixed, not knowing what else is on the plate of the work people, but what they often think and what they say to me as well. They got nothing else to do. I don't know what they're doing. I have to give them work to do. And that's not the case. Your staff are hired because they're qualified to do a job and they're professionals and they should be treated as if they are professionals. And they also deserve the respect of council. And the council deserves the respect of staff. And I talk to staff all the time and I tell them the same thing, that they have to respect the seat. We don't have to like each other, but we have to respect the seat. The public has elected council, and it's important for staff to understand that. And it's also important for council to understand that staff are here doing the job. And I can tell you, the reason that they're here doing the job most likely is because they believe in the municipality and they want to make a difference in their community, because it sure isn't for the pay. And the stress that they have to put up with often. I know that you have seen a number of newspaper articles about staff, and not just in this community, it happens all over the place, that staff are the ones who often take the brunt of council decision making. And I will repeat this incessantly, that it's not your job to micromanage staff. And I think it's really important for council to understand what micromanagement is. It's not just that you pick up the phone and call the road super and say, I want this done. It can be through emails. It can be coming into the municipal office and sitting with them in their office and wanting to know what they're doing every single day and why isn't this getting done, and questioning and all of those kind of things. This is, I think, to me, is one of your most important roles, and this is leadership. Councils are the leaders of the community. You have been elected by the people to represent them. And it's really important that you have a vision for the future. One of the things that I find often happens in communities where there is no vision, no goal for council, no future thinking, no strategic plan, council gets too involved in the day-to-day operational stuff and is worried about, again, how many paper clips are purchased, or what the public works fellow was doing when he was standing on the side of his grader having a cigarette. These are things that council ought not to be worried about. Council should be looking at the futures. What's your community going to look like in the next 25 years? And how are you going to put services in place to ensure that your community survives and is resilient and all of these different things? And that's when strategic thinking and planning comes into play. George Cupp did a session for mayors and CAOs recently, and he was talking about not liking the idea of strategic planning. He likes it being called strategic thinking. I think that's a really important differentiation, because strategic thinking, there's a plan behind it. You're strategizing how you're going to get from A to B. So once you have the vision, then you have to strategize on how you're going to manage to get there. One of the other things we see happen all too often is that community members are not engaged. We find a lot of apathy in the municipal sector. A lot of people are disillusioned with politics, generally speaking. And so they find it a bit of a challenge to want to participate. And I've met with councils where they think, I'm elected, I don't need to talk to any of them, and I disagree with them. You are here to represent the people, not your personal interests, the people. And how do you know what the people want if you don't talk to them? And I have gone to council in the community that I live in and challenged them and said, you need to talk to people you don't normally sit with at the coffee shop. You have to get outside of your comfort zone, because the communities are changing. One of the things that we're seeing in Northern Ontario, and I expect down in this area as well, is a lot of people are moving from the city because of COVID. They're coming out for a different kind of lifestyle, and we're seeing a lot of culturally diverse groups moving into our neighborhoods that we didn't have before. And it changes the fabric of community, and it changes the focus of the future for councils. And it is he? Excellent. Welcome, Mr. Kassan.
Thank you, Ms. Young Lovelace. I love computers.
Seems that we have this issue most of the time when we're here.
Actually, my IT fellow had to uninstall and reinstall the Zoom app and then go in on the internet somehow. So I apologize to council that I'm late.
Okay, so I can tell you that we are on the slide for council leadership, which is number 14, if you're following.
I will.
Okay, so the role of the mayor, I think I'm going to ask Paul if he will speak to this one.
Just catching up.
Do you want me to go through the first part?
Just tell me what slide you're on.
So I'm on slide number 16, which says the role of the mayor.
Right. All right. Do you want to continue and then tell me when you want me to go, or do you want me to start this?
Go right ahead and start.
Okay. So this is actually a really interesting issue, and we have a number of events or issues happening with respect to confusion about the role of the mayor. So first of all, Peggy's got section 225 of the Municipal Act on the slide, and these are the statutory roles of the mayor. So this is what the mayor is required to do. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the mayor is, in fact, I'm going to say only a councillor, which is partly true. So a mayor's vote counts for one vote in council when council is thinking about or debating an issue. So unlike many states, in Ontario, we don't have a super mayor. They're not a deciding vote. They're not a more powerful vote. So they have, when it comes to making decisions, one vote, just like any other councillor. But they do have some other roles. And so the first role, and this is the one that causes probably the most confusion, is to act as the chief executive officer of the municipality. You may be aware that Collingwood, a small municipality in Southern Ontario, got into trouble and had a judicial inquiry by Associate Chief Justice Frank Maraca. And one of the concerns there was the role of the mayor, and particularly with respect to the idea that they're the chief executive officer. So actually, Justice Maraca suggested that the act should change, and it should be made clear that the role of the mayor as a chief executive officer is essentially as a figurehead chief executive officer. They're not the same as the chief executive officer of a corporation. And the mayor does not have the authority to bind or to contract on behalf of the municipality. And I just want to tell you what Chief Justice Maraca said of the role of the mayor. So first, he said that the province should amend this section of the act to remove what he calls the inaccurate description of the head of council as the chief executive officer. And he goes on to say, the head of council of a municipality is responsible to council and does not have the authority to bind council. He goes on to say, describing the mayor as both the head of council and chief executive officer blurs the fact that the mayor is the head of council and the chief administrative officer, the CAO, or the clerk treasurer, or the municipal administrator, is the head of staff. So the mayor and the CAO are sort of on parallel levels. Justice Maraca says there must be a clear division of roles and responsibilities between the mayor and the CAO, a separation of the political from the administrative. This is back to what Peggy was telling you about when I was able to join. That council's role is the policy makers. They decide the levels of service, and that's the silo, if you will, that the mayor is in charge of. And then the CAO, or the municipal administrator, is the head of administration. He goes on to say that a municipality should set out in its bylaw the expectations of the mayor, and that those should include that the mayor demonstrates leadership to council members regarding compliance with ethical policies and codes of conduct. So what this means is that the mayor's role, in addition to being just a councillor, forgive me for that term, is also to provide leadership, to give council ideas, and also to provide leadership with respect to ethics and code of conducts. And the mayor, Mayor Sheldon in your case, it controls the council meetings, makes sure that order is kept in the council. So that's what it means when he says that he's responsible for compliance with ethical policies and codes of conduct. So it's the mayor's responsibility to point out problems and potential infractions with respect to that, as well as relevant bylaws and town policies. Also, the mayor is responsible for the integrity and transparency in municipal government. That should be a priority for the mayor, according to the Collingwood Inquiry. And then along the same lines, and this is important for all heads of council to understand, the mayor should intervene where she or he becomes aware of uncivil conduct at council meetings, at committee meetings, and in other work-related circumstances. So this goes into the chief executive officer type role. And the mayor is responsible to call out either individuals or members of council or members of staff if they're inappropriately behaving at council meetings, at committee meetings, and other work-related circumstances. And I've got an experience with this right now where councillors are treating staff members inappropriately by email. And Justice Maraca says that it's the mayor's role to call that out and make sure that staff members are protected. He goes on to say the mayor should be involved in the hiring of the CAO, and that the relationship between the mayor and the CAO needs to be one where they work closely and in parallel, but it's got to be clear that the mayor's role is as the politician, not as the administrator. The mayor does not run the municipality. The municipal administration is run by staff. That might be more than you wanted me to say, Peggy, on that one slide.
Well, I've moved to the next slide because I think you've covered a lot of that already.
Okay, yeah, I think I have. So are you on to role of staff now?
I'm going to the role of officers and employees now.
So this is very important because it's necessary to keep in mind that staff of a municipality, and you know, we have a person who's called a clerk, and it's important to know, and somewhat unfortunate that that term is used, because I think that sometimes people think that the clerk in a municipality is like a secretary whose job it is to do what council tells him or her, or to answer phones, or, you know, we hear of grocery clerks. I used to be one of those, and they're very different roles. Many positions on staff, like a clerk, like a treasurer, like a chief building official, like a fire chief, all have, in addition to their role under the Municipal Act, statutory responsibilities under their governing legislation. So it's important to keep in mind that these are professional people, and they're people that council should hire the primary staff person, whether it's called a CAO or a municipal administrator, and then that person should be responsible for the rest of the team. And the role of the officers and employees of the municipality is first to implement council's decision and establish administrative practices and procedures. So what that means is council is the guiding mind of the municipality, and they're to set policy and levels of service. And so they say to staff, okay, we want to have a recycling program. So staff, you go figure out how to do it and you implement it. As opposed to saying, staff, here's how you're going to implement the recycling program. So it's staff's role to implement the decisions of council. And the second one is really important, and that is to undertake research and provide advice to council on the policies and programs of the municipality. So back to my recycling program, council should say, we want to have a recycling program in our municipality. Staff, please give us a report on how to do that. And then the staff is responsible to go out, do the research, talk to the consultants, look at other municipalities and bring a report to council to provide advice. And frankly, staff also drafts the policies that council adopts with council's assistance in amending them. So staff's role is a professional, and there may be very important statutory roles. And their other role is to advise council. And that doesn't mean to tell council what council wants to hear. It's to tell council their best professional advice based on their research and experience. And that's why you hire staff. And then it's council's decision thereafter to make the decision on the policy, considering staff's advice and also their own experience and the discussions with ratepayers and community engagement that Peggy talked about earlier. Staff is responsible to ensure that the service level that's been decided by council is achieved. So if council puts in guidelines with respect to road maintenance, or council says we're going to follow the provincial minimum road maintenance standards, staff is responsible to ensure that the level of service is met. And they're asked then to report to council on a periodic basis to say, are we meeting the metrics? Are we not meeting the metrics? Do we have the resources? Are there policies that need to change? And it's council's role to deal with the policies and to allocate the budget to make sure they can fulfill the responsibility that you give them. So they advise and they help council understand what the procedures and policies are that are in place and whether those need to change, whether they're working, whether they're not working. One of the things that we see in some municipalities and a not here is that council staff is not in place to control council. We do sometimes see that in some municipalities. They're to provide advice, but not to provide control.
I think we should give an actual example of that, Paul.
Is it the one that you and I witnessed?
Yes.
So it's because of the different roles between staff and council. There's often confusion, there's often tension in municipalities. Because being on a governance board like council is not an innate task, and it requires education and understanding of what the job is. So oftentimes we do hear that council has been misbehaving or mistreating staff because people that run for council often want to make a difference in the community. They want to ensure that the potholes get filled quicker or that the garbage gets picked up on a more regular basis. They want to see things happen. They want to pick up a shovel, but that's not what council's for. And if you're doing that, that's offside. So we had a complaint from a clerk that he was being bullied by council. And we went to the council meeting, expecting to do some training with staff and council to get council to understand their role. But we were shocked when the clerk didn't like what council was doing, and it had to deal with hiring staff to help him. And so he stood up and he was pounding his fist on the table and telling council, you can't do that. He doesn't work there anymore. And it was a really shocking experience. So this is a really interesting, it was a real eye opener for me because I didn't expect that kind of behavior. But it's a really great example for staff and for council to be aware of, because staff's role, as one of the CAOs in Sault Ste. Marie used to say, staff's role is to provide advice and collect their paycheck. Their job is to give council the report and then let council make the decision, not to make the decision for council. And that's sometimes really hard for staff. And it's important for council to be aware that it is, because staff will put their heart and soul into coming up with a report for you. And you may not follow it. And that's often very difficult for a staff person to understand. But their role is not to control council, merely to advise. And then for council, based on the advice, to make decisions, which may or may not coincide with staff's recommendation. I think that was the example you wanted me to talk about, Peggy.
That is correct. Now on to the role of the CAO.
Okay, so the CAO is such a critical part, and under the statute, the chief administrative officer is defined. It's a permitted position under the act. It's not a mandatory position. So in other words, you must have a clerk, you must have a treasurer, but you can have a chief administrative officer. And you may not want a chief administrative officer. You may want to call them something a little bit different, a community manager, a municipal manager, something like that, that might be less official than chief administrative officer. But the important part of the organization and the critical role of this position is that they are the go-between between council and staff. And they are responsible to council for the performance of all staff. And they are responsible to staff to advise staff about the decisions of council. Now, the reason they're so important, and I recommend that you have any municipality has somebody in a position like this, is that it's then the single point of contact between council and staff. And that avoids both role confusion, and it avoids mixed messages. So in other words, maybe better an example. The CAO is responsible to know everything that's going on in the municipality, to know everything that's going on at council and everything that's going on at staff. That's their job. And I had a situation where a municipality was building a fire department. And one of the councillors was particularly concerned about the cost and the facilities that were being designed into the fire department. And the councillor went to the fire chief, because in that municipality, the fire chief reported directly to council rather than going through a CAO. And the fire chief told the councillor his very best opinion and advice about the build. But the councillor did not go to the CAO. And so the councillor actually went to council where the discussion was going on about the build, and made a number of statements that were incorrect and made him look very uninformed. And that was because when he didn't go to the CAO, he didn't realize that he needed also, when he was talking about the building, to talk to the treasurer about the ability to finance the project, and also to the chief building official, because there were some building code not infractions, but requirements that had to be met. And so the problem there was that they didn't have, or they did have, but this councillor went outside of the chief administrative officer. So had the councillor approached the CAO, The CAO could have said, okay, yes, we'll go talk to the fire chief for sure, but we're also going to talk to the treasurer. We're also going to talk to the CBO, the chief building official, or anybody else that the CAO would know has a hand in understanding and designing the project. So that was a really interesting example where the system didn't work, and it shows why it's so important to have somebody in this role so that you don't have a whole bunch of people coming to council with sort of siloed information, and you get a good piece of advice that is comprehensive. So I would really recommend that you consider putting a role like this in. It doesn't matter what you call them, but all of your senior staff people should report to this person, and this person then reports to council. It also avoids problems where councillors are tempted to or are managing the operation, which they shouldn't do, and councillors get in trouble that way because that's outside of their role. And so then they lose protection. I'm sure Peggy's told you about stories, and you've probably even read them. I've been reading them in Municipal World recently about not driving the grader or not driving the snowplow. And we've had municipalities where councillors come to the council table with the experience of running heavy equipment or driving a grader or snowplow, and they think that they can do a good job doing that. They might be able to, but the reality is that's not why you're on council. And you're actually going outside of the municipal insurance policy and your protection under Section 448 of the Municipal Act, which is what I call your get out of jail free card, if you as a councillor are driving the grader. So that's just an example of why following our rules, and particularly having somebody in this senior role to answer questions of councillors and to help councillors and staff understand and control, manage, I guess is a better word, the flow of information is a really good position to have. Peggy, I probably covered all 3 of your slides.
You did. That often happens, but I'd like to go to the next one now and show them kind of the organizational chart.
Okay.
We call it a reporting structure rather than saying it's our organizational chart. And one of the things that we find often happens is staff and council lose sight of who they work for. You're serving the people. So I like the fact that this design has the public at the start. It's the biggest circle. And then external stakeholders, those are your neighbors, those are other levels of government, things like that. I know it's a little bit hard for you to read here, but you can blow it up when you get the slides. And committees of council, and I want to talk about that for a minute, and I won't belabor it because that's going to be another conversation for another day. But committees of council we find often are not appropriately set up. They are advisory bodies. They're not doers. So we often see communities with recreation committees who somehow have their own bank account and their own money, and they are spending public funds, and they are managing it just like they were running their own little business. They should be going through council. They should not have a budget. They should be giving you guidance on programs and services that the municipality would provide. If they want to volunteer to help carry out a function, then that group of people should be reporting to the person who's in charge of recreation, not council. And I pick on recreation committees because they're the ones that are the most difficult to deal with, because they do a lot of fundraising, they do a lot of good for the community. And then when we come in and we talk to councils about this, they get concerned about the pool of money they've collected and things like that. And they've had to turn over their bank accounts. One of the things that I recommend in that case is that council create a reserve fund with any of the money that is in that pocket for recreation, that it gets used for recreation and that doesn't get just put into the municipal coffers to go elsewhere. So the reason I also call it a relationship or reporting structure, I said that sometimes we call it a relationship chart as well. We have another one that we use that really talks about how people interact, because sometimes what Paul was just saying about the CAO is often true with everybody within the municipal realm. You need to be talking to each other when you're doing reports for council to make sure that you understand what's going on in the other departments, because sometimes the decision council makes will affect other departments. I often say about the fact that the provincial government doesn't always think about municipalities when they're passing legislation. And they don't understand how it's going to impact you. And I've had arguments with people from the Ministry of Labor about the definition of worker and you know, it doesn't really say counselors are exempt. So you are included, and like there are times when the legislature just forgets that municipalities are unique. And I also think that goes down into when council's developing law and policy, that you also need to think about how that affects broader. My favorite story to tell about this one is for the town of Espanola, and I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but Espanola is a paper town, and they have a big pool and arena together with fitness center, etc. That building several years ago, the operation of it cost 49 cents of every tax dollar. And the municipality was drowning. So when the government came and raised, hey, we've got all this money, we'll give you the money to develop this building. Council thought, yeah, we'll do that. But what they didn't think about was the pool of people who would use it were not just from Espanola, they were relying on all the rest of these communities to make it flourish. And now the taxpayers in Espanola have lost assessment because of the mill. And it's going to be a struggle for them ongoing. So I always caution council when you're starting to look at planning for the future and wanting to get into some of these big projects, you need to think about what that is going to look like and how are you going to manage it. Okay, so governance versus management, Paul.
All right, so this comes actually from the Collingwood Inquiry Report. And it's important to recall that council as a whole is the directing or governing mind of the municipality, not individual members. I think that's pretty clear. But then Justice Morocco goes on to say it's responsible for setting policies and priorities, allocating resources, and providing direction to staff on the material, operational, and financial business of the municipality. I just want to stop there because I think that he should probably have capitalized the word S, the word staff, capitalized the S in the word staff. Council at the council table is responsible for providing direction to all staff about the projects that they want done for the municipality. That's not the same as council telling an individual staff member, I want you to go and pick up more coffee for the coffee pot. That is not council's concern. So it's providing direction to staff as a whole, and that's why the CAO or the top level management position is so important. And you'll see it says on the material, operational, and financial business of the municipality. So what that means is the large scale business of the municipality. So that means setting the budget. And that means asking staff to, on a periodic basis, whether it's quarterly or 6 months, report about budget variances. Are they meeting the budget? Are they exceeding the budget? Do they have money left over in areas that they're not expecting to spend? So you're dealing with the major financial issues of the municipality, not the day-to-day operation.
So
So
Paul,
that-
just to kind of interrupt.
Yep.
To be clear, that just means that the check log should not be coming to the council table for approval.
Absolutely. The check log is, we do see that happen in some municipalities, although I'm happy to say that many municipalities, most probably, are getting rid of that. That's not to say that councillors can't make an inquiry of the treasurer about expenditures. And typically, if a councillor is interested in a particular check, then you can make an arrangement to go and have a look at that individual check. But as long as the treasurer and the CAO are meeting the budget, then you as council don't care, because you put all your mind and effort into setting a budget that would meet the requirements of the municipality. How they do it then is staff's responsibility. So both the check register and invoices on a periodic basis shouldn't be on the council table unless they're in a report from the treasurer, where the treasurer is looking to you to say, we should go out to an RFP for this service, and this is how much money we've paid to accountants over the last bit, and here's what they've done. And so that's when you would look maybe at invoices when they come to you from the treasurer. But on a day-to-day basis, you don't care how much you're paying for paper clips as long as the office budget is being met. And that's staff's responsibility to ensure that it is.
And Paul, just saying that, I guess in that sense, like a variance report for council, perhaps quarterly, once budget is done, would be sufficient, correct?
Yes, absolutely, Your Worship. And that's what many municipalities are doing. They're going to a quarterly variance report. And just think of the time that this saves you, and also then make sure as a governance board, you're seeing that the policy you set out is right. So the treasurer comes to you after the first quarter and says, we're high in our road maintenance because it's in the winter time, and so we're spending all the money. So we're probably going to use that up in this first quarter, but then we've got a whole bunch of money still in Parks and Rec. And so you're looking at it from the council perspective saying, yep, we're on track. Or the treasurer might be saying to you, Your Worship, we've burned the entire road budget in January because we've had so many massive snow events. Now council has to look at the budget again to say, okay, what are we going to do to solve this problem? Because we know we're going to have to continue to plow the roads into June if the winter goes the way it is right now. And so we're probably going to have to cut other services. That's council's decision. And I 100% agree with you, Your Worship. The variance report lets you do that job. And frankly, Your Worship, just to take that one step further, the $87.29 that you spent on paper is immaterial to your budget. And so that piece of information doesn't help you as council do anything from a policy perspective, right? Because you don't know how that affects the budget, and it's to be looking at and giving you information that's not helpful for your job.
May I just ask a question for clarification, please? It's Andrea.
Yes, go ahead.
So are you suggesting then, Paul, that so if a quarterly variance report was presented and let's say that there was a concern, that at that point you would review your budget? Because I was under the impression, at least in my experience here, that once the budget was set, you don't touch it. Or can you just please clarify that point, that if at the quarterly report there is something identified, how that gets handled, and then what is council's option at that point then, based on what you're saying?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So what you would do in that case, and so I'm going to imagine to go along with your question, the scenario is going to be that we've had major unforeseen snow events and we've blown the budget. So what's going to happen, the treasurer is going to know that you're going to be looking for a quarterly variance report, or the treasurer might even be looking at it earlier than that because we've had a catastrophic event. And the treasurer is then going to come to council with advice about how to fund the rest of the operation. So it's true that you generally don't touch the budget, but if you've had a catastrophic event that has changed things, then you might do, I think it's called an interim budget, and I'm looking to Peggy for that terminology.
So I'm going to add to what you've said, Paul, because a budget is a living document, just like your strat plan. And it's not something that's carved in stone. You pass it by bylaw, you can amend it, you can change it, you can adopt it. Sometimes in the circumstances you were thinking about, Paul, you'd be looking at issuing potentially a supplementary kind of tax bill as well, because if you've already, if you don't have any money in your reserves and you've had this catastrophic event, you may end up having to go back to the taxpayers and say, we need more money this year because of this. And so you could also do this. So there are things that can be done, and that Paul is correct when he says that that would come from the treasurer. And the treasurer would often reach out to the auditor if they don't know how to resolve some of these things. So your auditor may also give you advice.
And they're also going to reach out to municipal affairs, and they're going to look to see what provincial funding might be available, and they should be providing you with advice on the problem and the solution, if it's possible at that quarterly event. And on one more thing on that question, Andrea, that Peggy just brought up, that I think it's important for council to understand. As a governance board, council makes law. When you pass this bylaw, you're making the law. But just like the federal government or the provincial government, you own that law. And so if it's not working, you can change it. So the fact that something's in a bylaw, like your budget, like some policy, if it's not working, you own it and you can change it. Sorry, I just wanted to bring that in so that council does really catch that important part of the governance process.
So can I just tie that in, Paul, that just where I see you're going with this based on what's already been said so far, that again, the key is in order for those departments to function with checks and balances built right in to how they must purchase things and, you know, what's involved with that to ensure there's competitiveness and all those principles. I think you get what I mean with that, that once you have those governing principles and you have the checks and balances built into our bylaws and processes and policies, that in itself eliminates the need for council to review it on a regular basis, unless, of course, there's either a catastrophic event or something that brings it to the attention that a policy hasn't been met. Am I right there? Like that's the need to keep your policies current with how business is being done, with the needs of the municipality are now. Like I think right off the top of my head, a big discussion is about equipment. When you have big equipment repairs, they can be like bottomless pits, but if we have a good set of systems, policies in place that say when this, do this, when this, do that, it's like a algorithm that it just all falls into place. And good, bad, or ugly, if those policies are written well and are comprehensive and in scoping of our municipality, that in itself allows those employees to do a good job. You set them up for success, and you set the municipality up for the benefits of having employees that succeed. Am I correct?
100%. 100%. One of the things that we're seeing, and I think this actually comes from the George Cuff presentation, and I don't remember what municipality it was, but he was saying that when he got this municipality he was working with to set the policies and to set the expectations, and to get rid of the check log and the invoices and all that, they went from having weekly meetings of 3 or 4 hours to having a monthly meeting of 2 hours, because council's job, just like you said, is to set the policies. Once the policies are there, then what you want is a periodic confirmation really from your CAO, I'm going to use that term just for a placeholder, that these metrics are being met. So you're 100% right.
So Paul, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip through a few things very quickly here because we do have a closed session.
Okay.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the staff council relationship, and I kind of addressed a lot of that at the beginning when I was talking about respect and how it's important that we all respect one another. We don't have to like one another, but we do have to respect the positions. And I think it's really important that you also are aware of the staff council relations policy that you have adopted, and that you keep that in mind when you're working with staff at the council table. And this is what it was John Maxwell that was talking, that I was listening to his book, and he was talking about the fact that ethical behavior is really about the value that we have in asking ourselves, how would we like to be treated in this situation? So if you're sitting at the council table and you've got a staff person who you know might be a little bit shy and is trying to present their report, instead of being aggressive or pushing them or asking a pile of questions of them, put yourself into those shoes and think about how would that staff person feel. And it's the same for staff. You have council at the table, and council may be new and they may not know the rules and responsibilities well. And how would they feel if you were like the fellow that Paul and I met, yelling and screaming at the council? I think it's really important that you just ask, how would you like to be treated in this situation if it was you? So now we're not going to go over the procedure bylaw tonight. We have two bylaws for you. One is the procedure bylaw. And as you will all know, 238 of the municipal act requires that you have one. This is not a choice. The procedure bylaw talks about your meetings and how your meetings are going to be run, and the role and responsibility of everybody at the meetings. And we talk about procedure bylaws and why it's good to have one that works for you. And you are a level of government. I expressed earlier that it's not a group of people just getting together to talk around the table. Decorum is important, and it's up to the mayor to manage the council meeting. And I've encouraged mayors to actually, at the beginning of the council meeting, say, this is our process, and here's how this meeting is going to run, and remind council members that that's the case. I have Paul and I actually have talked about this mayor often, and you will probably know Mayor Debbie Grills from Head Clare Mariah. And she is a very interesting person at the council table when she's the mayor. She comes in with something she says all the time. And to kind of be that leader at the council table, giving council some feedback or some kind of positive and talk anyway. I think it's really important for everyone to understand that this is a level of government, and that by focusing how your meetings are going to run, you will find that your decision-making becomes much easier. And then expected behavior bylaw. That's another one that we're going to be handing out shortly. The expected behavior bylaw, I think, is really important. And it's about managing behavior. Now, you may not have an issue at the moment with people sitting in your gallery. Because of COVID, the people are, your room is too small, you can't have any more. So this creates a framework for you that talks about how you expect the public to behave when they're interacting with council. Because you have a lot of other policies that talk about how council is going to behave, about how staff is going to behave. But this one is for really about citizens and how you expect them to behave when they're interacting with your staff and they're interacting with you as council. I was asked by a council to do an investigation with respect to over 300 emails that a member of the public had been sending to one staff member. Now, that person had also sent them to other staff members. We were just looking at the volume, and I did an actual cost analysis on it. It was about $18,000 or $19,000 it cost for the staff to deal with that volume of emails. And I think it's important that we understand that when this stuff happens, it's a cost to the taxpayers. And one of the things that council often thinks is staff have lots of time to do whatever council wants them to do, and that's not necessarily the case. Paul explained to you about the mandatory obligations they have under legislation, and those things take time. So this policy is something that is a best practice. It's not required, but it is important, and it clearly tells the public what you expect. And the ombudsman has suggested that this is the kind of policy you have in place before you kick people out of your meetings, or you set up. So in this circumstance, they set up an email address so that the individual would direct it there. The material would go to a committee. The committee would decide whether or not these things would be addressed. We will be back to talk to you about these policies, but that's. And I'm going to quickly, in 2 minutes, go over workplace culture audit and go forward strategy. So as you know, we recommended that you do one of these, and E4M is going to be doing this strategy for you. And Tammy, who's with us this evening, will be talking in closed a little bit more about some of the findings that we've had with respect to this, but she has spoken with your employees. And so what a workplace culture audit is really, you're looking at the workplace. You're looking at whether or not the people who work here are satisfied with their employment, whether or not you have the right things in place, like job descriptions, whether or not you have employment contracts, whether or not you have the right foundations that you need to be running a good administrative side to your municipality. So the process is one-on-one interviews with staff. We will do council and staff surveys. We will look at any of the external complaints that have come in about employees. We will review policies. We'll do an analysis of what we find, and we'll make recommendations for changes. And I can tell you that one of the things that I know the personnel files are going to need to be improved. It's important that these are documents that are records that you need to have about your employees. And I was doing a quick audit of a few of them, and there are a lot of things that are missing. So we will provide you with some of those tools. And the expected outcomes is a clear understanding of how your employees are working, what their relationships are like internally and externally, and then to develop a go-forward strategy for you to build a healthy and resilient workplace culture. And then these last things go into talking about a council term plan. I am not going to read them, but a council term plan is something council wants to do. Now, I know this council doesn't have a long time between now and the election, but I do think it's important that you start to think about what you would like to do and pick 1 or 2 things that you know you can accomplish in the next 6 months, the next 9 months. And this will help council to have a focus and start to build some positive things in the community. And that will be the end of our presentation.
Yeah, any of the paperwork for council will hand out and what we talked about last for you to take home and review. So, yeah. Okay. So I guess that ends our open session. Okay, so right now we have to, that council go into closed session pursuant to the Municipal Act 2001. Section 239 2B, subject matter is about an identifiable individual, including municipal employees. Section 239 2D, labor relations or employee negotiations, and section 239 to section 239 2F, advice of a solicitor client privilege, including communications for that purpose. To discuss, number 1, workplace safety and reporting to the Ministry of Labor. Number 2, realignment of personnel. 3, employee contracts, wages. And 4, employee performance issues. I need a mover on that. Councillor. Councillor Caulfield, a seconder.
May I just ask one question, just for the purpose of declaration of conflicts? Will we have an opportunity to know a little more about that once we get into closed, to not, talk about the closed items in open, but I kind of missed that first part of the meeting when you called for declaration of conflicts, or disclosure of interest.
Yeah, that is kind of standard practice. If there's something in the meeting that you feel you have in the closed portion that you have a conflict with, it's probably best for you to leave and report the conflict when you come out.
So will more detail be given at the start of the meeting?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. And just again, because I'm on the phone, I couldn't get in on Zoom, is there a new number to call in? I know the last time we kind of went from open to closed, you asked me to stay on the line. So what would you like me to do?
Just,
We have a separate Zoom meeting for the close.
yeah, we have a separate Zoom meeting for the close.
So I will email the.
So we will email that to you right away.
Okay, thank you. I will log out of the close, or out of the open then now. Thank you.
All in favor of the resolution?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Second.
Yes.
John did, so, okay, so that's carried then.
Okay.
Oh, they're already in.